What's up, everybody? Today, I'm excited to have James Taylor Foreman back in the Yours Truly virtual studio. In podcasting, one of the challenges is finding people to podcast with. On this journey over the last 8 months, I have sought people out, people have sought me out, and on occasion, people have pointed me to individuals they think would be a good fit as Yours Truly guests. A special listener, friend of the podcast, who I met at Symbolic World back in February of this year, put James on my radar several months back. And when I reached out to him, James graciously reached back and we had a special conversation. Link somewhere here and in the description. About his experiences with people associated with this corner of the internet, characters like Jordan Peterson and Ken Wilber, to name a few. We discussed his recent published piece, Why I Am a Christian Again, which you can find over on his excellent Substack, linked below, which I encourage everyone to go and subscribe to. In my constant ponderance of how to move the Yours Truly podcast forward through time, I've been reaching out to several guests to come back as repeats. Guests that connect deeply to a big part of me, that a part is something I have not tended well to in recent years, until recent years, within my being. That part being creativity, which might surprise some of you out there, as this journey on YouTube has been a very creative one, and I am a musician as well. But if you know other parts of my story, you may be able to understand that finding the thread of deep truth, something akin to the authentic authenticity, the kind of deep magic that Aslan talks about in the Chronicles of Narnia, this has been something like that, but only in recent years that I've been able to reconnect with. So this second conversation with James Taylor Foreman is a first in a series of repeat guests that I'll be attempting to center the conversation around the topic of creativity. What it is, where does it come from? How do we grasp it? And how do we do it? If you want to support the channel, give it a like and subscribe. If that makes sense, share it with friends. And if you believe yours truly is something that might be described as worthwhile, you can support the channel financially by becoming a channel member. So check that out. In the recent months, James has cranked up his Substack output to several a week. So I'm curious, where's the creative energy coming from? Why he made the shift, and what is the overall creative journey look like? Our last conversation centered around his story of rediscovered faith. Today, I look forward to learning from James about his craft and how it can shape and influence me as we practice some conversation craft here on Yours Truly. So without further delay, I give you James Taylor Foreman. Hi, this is Christian Baxter, and you're listening to Yours Truly, a place we go to think out loud. All right. Oh, here we are, man. We are back at it.
We're here.
Yeah, we're here, just barely hanging on the digital connection.
That's right.
You're out in the woods.
I am.
Yeah, man.
I even turned around so you could see the trees behind me.
Very nice.
Yeah, so, that's not a digital background, by the way.
Yes, it's not the virtual background. This is real
trees.
Real trees. So you're in Louisiana right now. We were talking about it backstage.
I am. I'm in Louisiana. Actually, my mother lives on a road called State Line Road, I was telling you. And it's the state line between Mississippi and Louisiana. So we're in Louisiana, but just barely. And the closest town is Kentwood, Louisiana, where Britney Spears is from.
Very nice.
So that's our claim to fame. Actually, my stepdad was good friends with her dad in high school. So, and he has gotten to be quite infamous. So that's
I'm sure. Yeah. Her whole story is an infamous one.
It is. Yeah. It's a sad one, but
it is.
That's not what we're talking about today. Well, we're talking about creativity,
Yeah, that's a certain kind. That's like a manufactured. I was having that conversation with my daughter about the difference between like a pop star and like a writer. And that I actually think that, even like people like Taylor Swift and Ed Sheeran have some form of longevity to their projects because it's based more on their personal creativity than being manufactured by totally manufactured product by there's something of them in there. I don't know if
Yes,
that makes sense.
I agree. I tend to agree. I think you can say whatever you want about Taylor Swift, um, and it's not my style of music,
Right.
but I would never think that she's not a real artist. Like, I think anybody who says that is just like, because she's been around for a long time and she changes, and I don't know. There's something truly creative about that, on top of being a pop star, which is more about the business side of things, I think.
Sure. Yeah, there's a body of work that can speak for itself.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, man. So, but obviously not here to talk about that, Taylor. Um, James
Yeah.
Taylor Foreman, man. So we kind of, like I was mentioning in the intro, that last time we spoke, it was more centered around like your article about why you're a Christian again, and characters in this space that had a impact on that, like Jordan Peterson and Ken Wilber, that you creatively like, and people like Peugeot and John Vervaeke, that you like weaved into that story even without telling their names and such. And so, but today I wanted to see if we could find a way to kind of talk um, about creativity. And so I guess, uh, what's your journey with writing? Like, that's your thing. You have a Substack. You're a writer.
Yeah.
How has that fit into your life? Where did that come from?
Well, it's really cool, actually. Uh, a synchronicity, maybe, that I'm sitting in these woods, because since I was about 8 years old, I've been running around, or was running around woods like these, telling stories to my nephew and my cousins, um, and writing, trying to write books in notebooks and never getting all the way to the end. And so I've known since I was about 8, and playing in Louisiana woods, that I wanted to be. I didn't know what it was, because we were from a small town, and that sort of thing, was unheard of to me. In fact, I I grew up in a very small town, Louisiana, Jackson, and I had those tendencies. I think some people are just kind of drawn to that, and but I didn't know anybody to, like I said, I didn't have any role models in that way. And when I went to college, I went to LSU, um, just like because it was close. um, it wasn't like I didn't we didn't have that sort of like go somewhere else for college thinking. Um, and whenever I went to a philosophy 101 class, it was like my mind exploded. Like, I loved it. And so for me, it's always been like, one, my roots as a kind of like, we would create like these grand mythologies. That was kind of what I liked about storytelling when I was 8, was like I would tell my cousins and my nephews these great like mythologies about like, gods being broken into pieces and having to go find the shards, and all this, are like centaurs in the woods or mythical creatures and stuff like that, was my interest, and it kind of seemed to evoke the imagination of my family. And so it was that, and then it was also like philosophy. It was also kind of, um, an interest in ideas that was sparked for me when I'd always been kind of interested in ideas, but whenever I went to college and discovered philosophy, that became a central thing for me. So it continues to be that today. It's something that I've kind of thought. I try to do other things in my life. I've had many jobs. I'm one of those people that I've had so many, like way too many jobs. I've had, and very diverse types of jobs. I've been a bouncer. I've been a handyman. I've been an ad man. I've uh, worked at a Subway. um, I've worked in Silicon Valley. I've written scripts and stuff like that. So I've kind of tried everything, but it's always kind of come back to those two things: mythological storytelling and philosophy. And so that's really what I've been centering on my Substack. Is the Substack's called The Metaphor, and it's kind of about those two things.
So yeah, the college influence. What'd you end up majoring in, or did you keep taking classes that like kind of were connected to that?
Yeah, I have a degree in philosophy, and I have a
Okay.
minor in German, and I think I also technically had a minor in film.
Okay, so after when you say German, that actually like, well, how does that connect? And then all of a sudden I was thinking about like all the German fairy tales. I don't know if that even
Yeah.
makes sense or not, but uh,
Yeah, for sure. I read, I was drawn to the German, I was drawn to like, uh, Nietzsche and I mean, the German philosophers were the best of the best, and so that might have been part of it. The other
yeah.
thing was that, I'm kind of, I don't like, bureaucracy. I don't like I don't like fitting into a system. So when I went to my counselor to set my minor or set my foreign language, I told them that I studied Spanish in high school, and they're like, "Oh, well, you'll have to take a placement exam before you can start taking your Spanish classes." And I didn't feel like doing that, so I was just like, "What else?" And they said, "How about German?" And I said, "Great." Actually, this is a funny side story. Because I didn't feel like taking a Spanish placement exam and just randomly decided to take German, not randomly because I knew the German philosophers was something I was interested in, but kind of randomly. Like I decided in that moment, sitting in that chair, just because I didn't feel like taking that test. Because of that, I took a German class and I convinced and the teacher was wonderful. I wish I could remember his name. He was a really great guy, and he taught me a lot about German music. And
Hmm.
I really liked talking to him about art and philosophy and stuff. And because of that, I got my friend to take his class, and he convinced both of us to study abroad in Germany. And my friend it was my friend from high school, and her boyfriend was my now best friend Mitchell, who's getting married. And
Ah,
I'm actually here in Louisiana. It's a small world, so many connections. I'm here in Louisiana partially to go to my friend Mitchell's wedding, actually. But at the time, he was dating my friend from high school, Abby, and she took my German teacher's class, and my German teacher convinced both of us to study abroad in Germany. So the three of us, me, Abby, and Mitchell, went to study abroad in Germany. And Mitchell and my other friend decided to get their master's degree in Germany. So they stayed
wow.
there. And actually, my friend Mitchell was marrying a girl from Germany. So because I didn't feel like taking he would hate this story. He would, but technically, because I just didn't want to take a Spanish placement exam, my best friend is marrying a German girl, and lives in Germany.
What- the butterfly effect,
That's right.
man, that's crazy. So that's some of the foundation. You're telling stories, mythical stories. What are you brought up Nietzsche, and I've read enough of your Substacks to know. I mean, you have I don't know if beefs is the right word. Do you have what is your relationship with Nietzsche like, and how does that inform your creative process? Because it seems to kind of come up. Uh,
Yeah, yeah. Nietzsche's one of my favorites because I think he's really wrong, but I also think that he's brilliant, and so it's kind of exciting. um, but when you read him, it's like it's really intimidating because he's telling you things that are really terrifying, and he's definitely way smarter than me. Like when I read his writing, it's like this person was one in a billion. Like this person had like an IQ of like 200. And it's just sort of like mind blowing to encounter it. And it kind of scares me, and it's actually hard for me to endure. But I've read Zarathustra and Beyond Good and Evil and a couple other things, and I think it's just really exciting because he's wrong, and it actually killed him. I wrote one of my favorite things that I wrote in the flurry of things that I wrote in the last month was I see Nietzsche fall like lightning, and
yes.
I kind of it resonated with people, I think, because I think I that was the best I've ever summed up why Nietzsche is wrong and why what he believed killed him. I had a bunch of people reach out to me about that, saying that it was helpful to them. People who have encountered Nietzsche. I'm not saying that I know everything about Nietzsche or anything like that. It was like a personal story of why I was or how I was able to read Nietzsche and not and overcome him, and not like let his philosophy um, uh, drag me down into nihilism, which is, I think, a danger with that sort of thing.
So how are you able to take that, like your personal quest with Nietzsche, and craft that into story? Like how does that process work for you when you encounter those? It's an intense thing, and then you want to take that and you want to craft it, and then you share it.
Yeah, I I was telling Riley and I were my girlfriend Riley were driving from Texas to Louisiana, and she said, "What are you thinking about?" And I said, If I were to tell you what I was thinking about, it would take me 45 minutes." Like, and I think that is kind of how these things come to me, is like I just I'm like, I know I'm gonna write something called "I See Nietzsche Fall Like Lightning," and I got it. Like, I was reading Girard at the time, and I was reading Paradise Lost, and I was thinking about Nietzsche, and I was talking to people about it, and one day I was like, I got it. And I knew I could write the whole thing. And so I just didn't know. I was afraid though, because I was like, I am not an expert. I went to state school, and like I'm just like a guy that reads. And so I was like afraid of trying to take him on. Um, so I knew I had to be humble and I had to be personal, you know. And so that was my approach. And I almost didn't write it, but I decided to. And so the way that I work practically is that I'm very verbal. So I'm very lucky that we live in a time with like AI transcription. So I go on walks in my neighborhood in LA, and I just talk. I have my headphones in, and people can see me gesturing to the air and just talking, and
You probably
I
fit
get
right in. You probably just fit right into the box.
yeah, yeah. And I get on a roll, especially with that one. Like when I was talking that one out, I was like, I've got it. I was like, I've nailed it. As far as I can nail it, I'm getting better all the time. But I just try to compare to my previous self. Um, and I talked it out, and then I let that sit for a day, and then I come back, and it's like 10 hours of editing, or probably more. That's the minimum. And I move things around and I add things, but it's so great to have a spoken draft to work off of. That is really how I work, is like, if I just have some paint splatter on the wall, I can turn it into a mural. I just need the beginning. I need the seed. And so I'd say, like, a lot of time that one was like pretty dang close to like how it would be on first draft. But that's really, really rare. Most of the time it's like 80% of what I say is reworked, and all that, like 80% of the original language is gone. Um Once I finish. This was probably more like 50 or 60%, which was really good for me. Um and so I edit, which is I really recommend this to anybody who's struggling with drafting and editing, because writing is very difficult for people because they try to draft and edit at the same time. And it's like trying to play piano while doing algebra. It's completely different parts of your brain. And you actually should not do them at the same time. You will never be very good if you're trying to do that, because um, you have to like you have to create without judgment, and then you have to judge without creation. And you can't do it at the same time. It's a completely different vibe. And so that's the way I do it. People throughout history, like John Milton had his daughter. He was blind when he wrote Paradise Lost, so his daughters transcribed his speech into Paradise Lost. But the way that he would do it was that he would memorize like 100 lines of his he wrote in iambic pentameter, which is the poetry style of like how Shakespeare
Shakespeare.
wrote. And he would memorize it all, and then he would like sit down with his daughters and say it, and they would kind of like clean it up.
Wow.
And yeah, so I think and like Kierkegaard would take long walks, and most of the writers that like have some kind of process to get out of their own way, so they can draft, and then they have a separate process for editing.
So like the threads that I'm connecting is when you early in the conversation, you talked about walks in those woods behind you and you're telling stories while you're
Yeah,
walking. And you're still telling stories, to your AI assistant, but you're like, you're telling that story while you're walking. And then, so there was like actual formation being done in your life through that process, and it carries through. Then you learn some, technical skill in college, like on how to write papers and write, like kind of craft things formally. And now you're sometimes people, I think it's like, oh man, what is it? The 10,000 hour rule and stuff kind of like that people look at creativity and they just think, oh, I could never do that. Or, how do I get started? How do I get started? It's like there's like but
yeah.
you're kind of talking about, do you feel like where you're at is, I don't know if the word's unbroken, is like an unbroken thread. Do you feel like that? Do you of your
It's
life? Yeah, go ahead.
I love that question, Christian. That's that's fun because it does feel like that, but it's so funny because, like I said, I've had many different jobs, and I have gone out into the world by myself, and tried to do a bunch of different crazy things. Um, but I think if you try to live authentically, and if you attack uh, your resistances, if whatever's holding you back or making you afraid, if you just attack and just keep trying to find the core of who you are, you end up back where you started, but in a way that's surprising. Um, and so it does feel like an unbroken thread, and it feels like very, it's like the hero's journey. It's like I went through all these darkness and I left my home behind, and I had to go through all these trials and tribulations, and I eventually end up back at home, but with a completely new perspective. And here I am, literally back at home with a new perspective, talking to
Mhm.
you about this sort of thing and being able to talk about it in ways that I could have never imagined when I was younger. Um, but it shows up in many different ways because I think a lot of people, when they go, they leave their home behind, and sometimes they never come back. They never figure out how to connect their roots to their aspirations. But I think that's very important to be able to talk to your family, um, even though you have gone and seen different things that maybe they never thought of. I I think it's very important to me that I still can have dinner with my family and we can laugh together, and um, that um, there's just like an importance, I think, to being grounded, uh, and not letting your heady thoughts take you away into a world where you're like resentful and isolated and think that you know things that other people don't. I
Yeah.
think the purpose of philosophy is to be able to put words to things that ordinary people go, "Oh, wow, that's my experience." You know, I just never would have thought to say it like that. That's what you're trying to do with philosophy. You're not trying to like think of something crazy um that no one with common sense would agree with. What you're trying to do is put words to common sense. I'm very much like a Platonist. I believe like Plato's idea, learning is remembering. So when you learn something very true, it should resonate. It should sound true to even people who have no training. Um, it was also something that I really learned doing comedy because with comedy you do a lot. Like comedy is hard, and you have to practice and you have to write all this stuff and you have to like try things, and most stuff isn't funny and it doesn't work. But then when it's time to perform, which I did at the Groundlings, it was like you put on a show that is funny to people who have no experience with comedy, and when they talk to you after, they're just like, "Oh, you're funny." Like they don't see the work that you put into it. They just feel like you're just sort of a silly cool. And I don't know how to explain it really. It's just like
What's the intersection between comedy and philosophy?
Comedy is I think putting allowing the shadow, allowing the parts of ourselves that we don't like to be expressed so that we can have a catharsis, which looks like laughter. So like whenever you're doing comedy, you're acting like hopefully you're acting like a part of the audience that they know about, but they are afraid to express. And when you act like that to an exaggerated way, they see themselves in it, and then they see that it's okay. They see that, the parts, the shadow parts of their personality that they've rejected, that actually it's okay, and that their foibles can be redeemed. And then they laugh. They don't know any of this is happening. They don't need to, but like they laugh because it's a recognition and it's a relief. And we make this loud noise to express this relief. It's a thing like that. And I think philosophy is just like that. I think it's gotten, like, academic philosophy has gotten very far from that, because a lot of academic philosophy is trying to say things that, it's trying to like come up with ideas that to change the world or to create utopia or to, make the world in someone's image. And it's not supposed to be like that. Philosophy is supposed to be like Socrates, where Socrates said that he was a midwife. He was the midwife of men, because what he would do is he would ask people questions that would pull out their truths, their true self. He would challenge people in their falseness and their bullshit, and he would keep asking questions until the real person that was in them would come out. So like that's what philosophy is for. It's like it's very similar to comedy like that. And that's why Socrates is funny. Like Socrates is like he's an asshole. He's funny. He's constantly, they killed him because he was like constantly asking questions that the authorities at the time didn't want people to think about. He was famously corrupting the youth, you know. And so I think it's a similar thing.
There seems to be in our moment in time, like an intersection in this creative and philosophical world with comedy and philosophy. The names that come to mind are like, from where you're from, like Theo Vaughn talking to John Vervaeke, like that happened, a few months ago, and Joe Rogan talking, to anybody. And there are things there like pointing out the truth. There seems to be like phileo sophia, like the love of wisdom, right? That's what it's supposed to be, which is like a relationship with wisdom. And wisdom is a certain part of what is true. It's like sharing a certain part of truth. And then you're talking about comedy being something so that we can laugh at the truth, and it seems like if you're a good comic, then there's a certain level of shadow integration that you're doing
Yes.
in that craft that probably makes you able to deal with truth, hard truth in a certain way, at least laugh at it. But I think we're in an interesting time with everything that you're talking about. At least some of us that are paying attention. I don't know. Would you agree with that assessment? Do you think that that's close? Or?
Yeah, I do. I think, first of all, there's many dangers with both philosophy. The danger of philosophy is that it becomes ideology, that you become a midwit. I wrote another piece called
Yes.
"Please Protect Wisdom from Midwits."
Yes.
And to become a midwit is basically to fall in love with your ideas and to think that your ideas encapsulate truth. And it actually prevents you from seeing the truth, is what it does. And so people who commit themselves fully to their midwit ideas are the ones that destroy themselves and destroy the world. And that's the danger of philosophy. And I think the danger with comedy is to become too too identified with your shadow. So I wrote a different piece about comedy, and how to make it in comedy was the name of that one. Um, and the problem with comedy, at least for the reason that I've kind of decided that it's not for me professionally, beyond a hobby, is that um, the incentive structure with comedy is that you are rewarded for you're rewarded for your shadow behavior. Like, people laugh at you because you're a fool, and you express a part of themselves that they're ashamed of. And if you do that for a living, you're never allowed to get better. You're never allowed to overcome your shadow, because if you ever do, you're not funny anymore. So it's almost the same trap, though, because all pretty much every academic philosopher is a midwit, because they get rewarded for their midwit takes. And if they ever overcame them, if they ever just realized that the philosophical truth is very much like common sense. It's very just like normal wisdom is probably closer to philosophical truth than it is to some midwit take. They would stop getting paid for their philosophy. They would lose their job, or they would lose status, or whatever.
Yeah,
So
because
this the
it's perpetuating the beast that needs to be preserved, that isn't fully integrated or something, like, that's an ideology or whatever. Sounds like you have to
Yes.
protect it. You're not only protecting yourself, but you're protecting the structure, or the system.
But I think that the reason that Theo Vaughn is like a once in a generation talent, like he is a extraordinary. I like, he says things that I think are so funny that I can't. I'm like, I don't understand how he thought to say that. Like, and it's just silly stuff. Like,
It's like possums. It's like possums.
yeah, he like makes these connections, and he's super relaxed and creative, and like word associations, and he's also playing pretty low status. Like,
Mhm.
he's like, I don't know if he's doing it on purpose. Like, it's so weird, because he's such a enigma to me, because he says and does things that I'm like, did he? Because some of it sounds like he's making it up. It sounds like he's like, oh yeah, I had a friend back home who didn't have any arms, or something like that. And it's
Yeah.
like, and I'm like, did he just make that up? And then sometimes it's like he doesn't. So it's just he's doing this performance that is like genius. I don't understand how he does it. But anyway, I think he kind of threads that needle of like not being captured by what's wrong with him, and allowing us to see wisdom through his silliness, which is, it's such a delicate, straight and narrow to walk. And I think that that's why he's great, and why his career keeps going. You know.
And that has to do with a certain level of healing. He's an addict, and he has been honest about that, and he integrated that into his like, I think he's open about it in a certain way, that it's part of his uh dealing with it. Then it can turn fun, but he doesn't, like you said, he's threading that needle, because when he talks about, like, you know sexual issues or drug issues, he's not glorifying them or glamorizing them, but the honesty of it is almost what's so funny in the moment, but also like really true. So yeah, I think he's your he's from Louisiana, correct? Like, he's from, yeah.
He's he's about he's from about an hour east of here.
So that's fun
So
connecting
yeah,
there. Yeah.
yeah,
So
yeah.
I mean,
Yeah. Go ahead.
yeah, go ahead. Well, I was just gonna say, like, your productivity, um, I get your emails, and all of a sudden it's like I'm getting several a week. Like, you started putting out a lot. It seemed like they were coming quick. What kind of ramped up that creative process for you recently? I know you're on a trip right now, but like, it seemed your creative process and your output seemed to like increase recently. Was there a key to that, or is that something you want to sustain? Um, how did
I,
you do?
I'm I'm fi- I, I'm figuring it out. Um I what happened practically was that I decided that I wanted to do this forever. And so I drew up a contract for myself. I hired myself. And this is sort of the practical realization for me, was like, um people work 9 hours a day at a job that they don't like, um, and then they hope they'll become like regional manager or something. That would be the reward at the end of that. And it's like that. Some people, that's their destiny, and I think there's a lot of honor in doing good work, and I try to do good work in everything that I do, in all the jobs that I've had. Um, but I just was like, I realized that if I really want to do what I was born to do, I have to just treat it like a job. And if I do it, if because I read for 2 hours a day, and I just wrote up a contract where I was like, you're going to write this amount. Now I'm going to slow down how much I'm writing just because it's too much to read. Um, it's For me, it was really, it was more for me because I was trying to figure out exactly what I wanted to say, and I knew that if I just kept going, I would zero in on what I wanted to say and how I wanted to say it. And and so that's what I did. And now I think I'm gonna uh, probably write the same amount, but just slow down my publishing schedule and make some adjustments to how I handle that. But I just think that creativity is work, and if that's what you want to do, that's what you have to treat it like work. And especially if you want to do it with your way, you want to do it the way that you want to do it, and you want to have freedom, you just have to hire yourself. You have to be your own manager and just say, all right, this is what we're going to do, buddy. And then you grow and you figure it out and you go, okay, that was a little too much, let's see. And you change the on October 1st, which is today, is it right?
I think so. Something like
It's
that.
I'm redrawing it's like I'm allowed to do it every month. I'm redrawing my work schedule, and I work it out with Riley. We sit down every Sunday and work out how we're going to do our week, and we sit down every month and work out how we're going to do our month. And so I'm reworking it a little bit, but I just I want to work. I want to have a job, and so I've decided that I was going to hire myself.
I love that. I had a mentor ask, he told me to ask myself one time, how much is an hour of your time worth? Things like that. And then I just want to resonate with you here for a minute. When I'm scheduling these into my iCalendar, I put it under my work tab.
Mm.
I've been doing that since the very beginning. And then I had about a month off of work earlier this year, and I just decided I'm going to get up every day and try to do this like it's my job. I've been doing this for like 8 months, and this is episode 82 that we're recording right now. So
Nice.
uh, and that's some of those were kind of the few first ones were by myself, but that's that grind. And sometimes, I don't even know if I'm doing anything other than doing it again. Some of it's about reps, but then I wanted to transition into this question because at his situation with creativity, like in this space and keep doing this, and am I kind of burnout, and I kind of had some depression and all this kind of stuff. And part of it was from wanting to be authentic about a part of me that I didn't know, like that I was worried what it would mean if I was honest or had an honest conversation like through this podcast about something that was important to me, something like politics or like culture. I'd kept it kind of in like the spiritual idea realm, for the most part. And I felt like if I don't, it was kind of like an integration issue, but it was rubbing up against wanting to be non-confrontational, rubbing up against what people might think in different parts of my life. Do you encounter, or how have you dealt with? Because I think certain parts of creativity and authentic creativity is a type of being true to yourself. That whole shtick. Like, what has that been like for you? I'm
I
curious.
I have the same fears, Christian. I struggle with the fact that my dad subscribes, and that my employer, whoever that is at the time, would subscribe, or um,
Yeah.
that who would see it, or what would they think, or what my friends from high school would think, or just like all that kind of thing. And for me, it was just like, well, I'm just going to attack, like basically like you're doing. I'm gonna do so much that I can't even slow down to wonder. Um, and pretty soon I realized that like when I was most honest, and I still have work to do with honesty. You know, especially like around politics and stuff. I also have non-confrontational fears, and um, you know, because Riley and I talk about that sort of thing, and we have kind of like, you know, the thing about reading a lot and being interested in ideas that are not in the mainstream is that you start to have really crazy opinions. And like I have really crazy opinions about stuff that is very, very not in the mainstream.
Yeah.
And um and I am working on it. I'm working on being, I don't think it's good to just thoughtlessly, you know, do to say whatever pops into your head. But I think working on incrementally getting braver, being like, okay, the Christian thing, for example, though, why I'm Christian again, for me,
Yeah.
that was hard
Yes.
because um, I didn't want people to think that I was Christian, I realized. And so that was basically why I wrote that piece because I was
Mhm.
like, well, I am Christian. So like, let me explain why. Um, and that opened up a door for me because now I'm not afraid of that anymore. And now I'm afraid of different things. I'm afraid of um, people finding out, you know, yeah, political issues basically is the main thing. You know, like
Yeah.
outside of the Overton window, stuff
Yeah.
I think that is non-kosher, and um, so yeah, I'm working on it all the time. But I wonder if for you, is it getting easier because you're producing a lot, or do you feel like maybe you need to like push your boundaries a little bit in ways so that you can slowly get a little bit more honest about that?
So my last conversation that I released was with Benjamin Boyce. I don't know if you've ever seen his stuff on the internet. He was at Evergreen University when Brett Weinstein got fired. I don't know if that narrative, if you
Yeah.
know that whole thing. And then he did a documentary series documenting that. But he's had conversations with people that are kind of in the space the kind of online social space called this corner of the internet. Like he's had conversations with Jonathan Peugeot. He's had conversations with Paul Vanderklay. He has had conversations with recent one with Jordan Hall. I don't know if you know who he is. Um,
Mm.
but he kind of was tracking the intellectual dark web during that whole, kind of downstream from Brett Weinstein. And so that specifically for me, I referenced it in my introduction. It was like, this episode's going to be different because I'm kind of like hitting this head on in a certain way, because there's not a lot that I probably disagree with um, Benjamin on, but he's kind of made uh, his podcasting YouTube endeavor about asking those questions and going to some of those spaces. Like he had a conversation with a guy named I think Jay Shapiro. I don't know if I'm getting this right. He's a documentary filmmaker who did a documentary between Majad Nuet. I can't remember his name. He's kind of like a liberal Islam guy, and Sam Harris back, 5-7 years ago or something. And they were talking about like the war in Israel and Palestine. And so like, I felt like I was like, even though I just was asking him questions just by like, association, or like um, entering into that conversation was intentional for me, but it felt, I don't know if courageous is the right word. But it does tap on that. And for me, that's the whole premise of yours truly, a place to think out loud. Like, am I willing to think out loud about these things, publicly? That's also in the wake of Jordan Peterson. So
Hmm.
those are all, that's all integrated, or needed to be integrated more for me to be uh to to feel uh to feel in harmony or something, or integrate something that didn't feel like it was in this space. And so I think that's part of that. And it was, I felt like I was coming up against that wall because part of it being an election year with the intensity, everything ramping up, and so much of what, just gets fed to you is online, it is political. And so anyways,
Yes.
that just happened, and it's my most successful. He's got a big subscriber base, but that's like been my most successful podcast. It probably helped that the title said like ideology clash, woke, and then the left woke, right woke, and the IDW or something like that. It was kind of provocative.
Yes.
So
That's
anyways,
good. That's good stuff.
there you go.
Yeah.
That's my answer.
I like that. Yeah, it's and also, I wonder if you think about this. I fear I don't want to do political stuff to just get attention.
Yeah.
Um, and but I have to kind of confront the fact that, like, well, there is a way to do that badly. You can be a provocateur, which maybe is not for me. But at the same time, um, I talk about political stuff privately.
Yeah.
Not a lot. We tend to focus more on ideas, and we don't watch the news and stuff like that. Um, but I have thoughts, and I think it's dishonest to some degree to edit that out.
That's
So
how I felt.
I'm with you on
That's
that.
how I felt. And it's difficult place. Yeah. And yeah, I agree. If you're asking, that's how I felt. And I
Right.
probably still do sometimes.
Right, because in normal life, people have just they have opinions that sound nice, and that makes a lot of sense socially. And I think when you start thinking about these things, you're like, well, that sounds nice, but it's not true. And you have to. And I think maybe that's what it is. Christian, is I always want to make sure that I'm talking to someone as if I love them,
Mm.
and not trying to dunk on anybody needlessly. Sometimes and even there's like moderation with that too, because sometimes it's like good to like do a little tasteful dunking. Um, so I think it's having your spirit about you, and knowing and making good decisions that are awake, every step of the way, and just trying to do the right thing.
So on that, have you dealt with much criticism in your work online? And
Um, no. Yeah, well, I mean, like on Substack, people are people have good discussions. Substack is a good place. Um, for whatever reason, it just is. And when people disagree, they have good discussions with me. And I had one instance of writing something, and then somebody came in the comments and was like insulting my friends in the comments, and I just deleted what he said, and then it turned out that he was really struggling, because what I said was that I think the piece was AI will write the world's greatest novel and no one will care. And the guy who was lashing out on at me and my friends was actually genuinely existentially terrified of AI, and
yeah.
he was having a really hard time. And we had a discussion, and we eventually kind of uncovered that. And he was like, I want his truth was, I want to believe that you're right. That was kind of what he eventually said to me, was I wish you were right, and I want you to convince me.
Hmm.
Um, and so that was kind of a wake up call for me to be like, even when people are being really psychotic and rude, they got something going on. And most of the time, the answer is to just block them and move on. But occasionally, people reveal that they need help or something like that.
Earlier in this conversation, you were talking about like a reading schedule to kind of bolster your creativity. I think that's something like the inspiration? What is inspiration? Is it just the reading? Or is there something else you think that's connected to it? Like you talked about that. I saw Nietzsche fall like lightning, or like it was like there was like kind of an aha moment that could be considered inspiration. But there's also like the source materials that are stewing. Like, talk to me about inspiration.
Yeah, I think the thread from when I was little is important, because if you I think for most of us, if you look back throughout your past, there's something that you've always been doing. And for me, it's like I am sort of I've been interested in ideas since I was little, and I've been having these thoughts and conversations for a long time, but just privately. And creatively, it means aligning my output with my temperament. And so it's not like and maybe it's different for other people, I don't know, but for me it's there are things that I do naturally that I'm good at, and my job as a creative is to align my output with that, so that inspiration can come from that. But then on top of that, just like natural temperament and trying to facilitate that through my creative process, there's also just work. There's just the fact that like you don't always feel inspired, and you just have to do it anyway. And I'm, you know, eh, I don't think the answer is to tyrannize yourself and to say like I'm going to do this no matter what. Um, but it's a balance, because you can't get rid of discipline altogether. You have to decide, okay, what am I willing to do beyond what I feel like doing? What 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 thing would I do longer than anybody else would do it, and with more suffering than anybody else would do it, because there will be much suffering. And then make yourself suffering doing the thing that you love. Because I like writing for me is like occasional, like, every now and then it's easy and it's inspired, and I'm that's great. But most of the time I don't want to, and I have to make myself do it, and then the inspiration comes on the other side of making myself do it. Um, so it's uh it's something that has been difficult for me to figure out, but I think that there's no easy answers on this path. And I think if if you do have something that you would suffer for, then I would say suffer for it as much as you can. Do it much longer than other people are willing to do it, um, because you're gonna suffer anyway.
Yeah.
You're gonna suffer
You
in
got to
your job that
choose.
you hate.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or the God you love.
So yeah, yeah. So suffer and sacrifice for what you think is worth your time, and then it becomes noble suffering, and I think that's when life takes on the greatest meaning.
Yeah. Agreed. Uh, do you, I'm bouncing all over the place here. Because we were talking about the political stuff, but it reminded me, and I've got your Substack pulled up here, and one of the recent ones I listened to from September 13th was Wide Awakes, presidential debates, and radical centrists. So you did like kind of go out there a little bit. But one of the interesting things, I didn't know if I had from history studied the Wide Awakes, but it's so interesting to have that as the whatever that meme is, to be awake, to be woke, to be those, like that is a part of, like it's like a meme within, you know, Paul, the scales fell from his eyes, like
Hmm.
there's like all this, uh, there's a lot of that, and attaching that's interesting to politics and what is, I don't know. It was a great piece about, is politics pointless theater or a necessary evil? It's the subtitle on it. But I don't know if you wanted to
Right.
say anything on that or not, but it's like you talking about going out there a little bit, like that was a step into that world some.
Yeah, and I did actually. I probably lost uh, 50 subscribers over that.
Damn.
Yeah, so that was a funny one. And one of my friends who's kind of like more on, he's kind of a pretty liberal person, I would say, was just kind of like dunking on me on Substack. And like, he was like, oh, my good friend just posted a piece, and I, what do you call that thing when you just know someone is wrong and you don't even, something like that. He just like
Wow.
sort of anonymously was dunking on me. And I text him and I was like, dude, you're not allowed to talk about me unless you're willing to text me and tell me why you think I'm wrong. And he like had this huge laugh. He said he like spit out water or something like that whenever I text him that. Because it was like, I think that was at the heart of it, was like, it was like loving confrontation. It was like, I'm not trying to tear you down or make you look stupid, but if you're gonna act like, you have to act a certain way if you want to be my friend, you know.
Yeah.
And like, this is what I demand. And so we had a good conversation about that, and we text back and forth about it a little bit. But I think people really get attached to whatever political take they have, and they don't know that they treat it like religion, but they do. And for me, it's like, I have certain political leanings. I have inklings of like, oh, I probably will vote for this person, or I think this is probably more right than this, or, but it's all just sort of like, I'm reaching and kind of guessing. And I think that that's the truest spirit of political discussion, is like, um, I don't know for sure, and you don't either. And so let's not pretend that we're clairvoyant.
Hmm.
And but it's so funny that you can say something as mild as that, and people get outraged. You know.
I guess that's the, yeah, like the nerve, which nerve is getting touched there? Is it a religious nerve, or is it just more of like a exploratory nerve or something? I don't know. Like you're saying.
Yeah. Yeah.
Let me see. I'm gonna read it. I'm gonna read, since we're on that. I wanted to read a quote from that. I had one written down. Um, as a matter of pure thermodynamics, there are exponentially more ways for systems to fall apart than ways for them to work. Our system works at all. That our system works at all is a miracle. Corruption is not confusing or surprising at all. Corruption is entropy. Corruption is baseline. So, that is, underneath that is something theological. I think, and maybe that's where trying to hold that, like you were saying, higher than just the politic, that there's a corrupt part to humanity, across the board.
Right.
Helps maybe keep it in the right place. Maybe. I don't know.
Yeah. Maybe. Man. Yeah.
That's me
Maybe.
getting a little bit. This was kind of fun because in my conversation with Benjamin that I had recently, Benjamin Boyce, he asked me when was the most stable time in society. And just like off the hip, I was like, I can't say that I would have known it then, or even that I know that it's true. It just felt something like the pre always connected world in the 90-ish time.
Yes.
And whether that's true or not, it's just how I felt. And you wrote that piece about, let me see here. The impulse to
The religious impulse
return to the 90s. Yeah. So I don't know. Do you have anything you want to bring out from that? That would be, I don't know.
Yeah. I was reading Mircea Iliad at the time, and I think that we crave a return to the mythical beginning. And we don't get that because we've tried to make every part of our lives profane. We've tried to make everything understandable and crystallized and out of the realm of the sacred. And we because it gives us a sense of control, but we don't like that. We crave the sacred. And so what happens is that a couple of things pop up to compensate for that. One is that we mythologize the recent past. We think the 90s were closer to creation, that they were closer to Eden.
Stable
And
state.
right. And it's just because we don't have rituals that take us into the mythical past for a renewal. And so we pine for the past, the recent past, as sort of an anemic replacement for that. And then at the same time, some people, or a part of us, or a part of our society, believes that the mythical past is actually in the future. This is the
Utopia.
cult of the utopian, or the cult of progress. And it was really started by Hegel, which I thought was interesting. I learned this from Iliada, that the Christians brought us the idea of the sacred and the historical. So like Christ was a historical figure, and he was also there at the beginning. So for Christians, we believe that there is a historical sacred, that God works in and through history, which allows Christians and Judeo-Christian society to better itself in ways like the West has progressed in ways that other societies never did, because we uniquely believe that God works through history. And so, but what Hegel did was he kind of took parts of that he thought were interesting and kind of left out some other parts. And so he made the Hegelian dialectic the thesis, antithesis, and synthesis. And he said that the world spirit, which was like a secularized version of God, worked through history towards utopia through this dialectic process. And so that was really the first time that we had really gotten a modern idea of progress, was through him. And actually, Kierkegaard, who was a more spiritual Christian, hated him. And Kierkegaard was more interested in faith and taking leaps of faith, and not being able to understand our lives fully and having to live them anyway, which I find much more compelling. But anyway, that was Hegel, and that was the sort of the birth of the modern progressive. And so now we've taken what was a constant throughout human history, which was to have these rituals to return to a mythical past, and instead of putting it in the past, we put it in the future. So now we're all working to return to the gods, which exist at some undefined point in the future, which is insidious for a few reasons. One is that we never get to experience it in our weekly or day-to-day life. There's no place where you can experience the future, and so we just have to all wait. And then the other thing is that we don't know that that's a religious sentiment. Modern people think that that's just they take it for granted that we will forever progress until we reach utopia. They don't realize that that's actually a religious ideology, and so that makes them doubly blind to it, because they think it's actually just like rational, a mundane truth. Yeah,
just self-evident rationality.
Right.
So the sun's beating down on you. I don't know what the weather's like out there. It looks warm. I don't want to press you for to long suffer in the conversation too long, but was there anything you were thinking of coming into this that we haven't kind of got to?
We talked about creativity. We talked about writing. I don't know. What about you? Something might come up for me.
Well,
I can scoot over a little.
Yeah, I noticed the weather's changed. You gotta get some shade there. I know what that, if the sun's beating down on you. Yeah, man. I'll tell you a little bit about me, where I come from in this. So I lost a creative identity in an act that most people think is innately creative.
Hmm.
When I was a modern worship leader in the kind of evangelical church, constantly doing musical performance weekly, and even like I would travel with my band and do that. But I was, because what it seemed like the culture demanded was cover songs. Um, it it really ate away at believing that what I could bring was worthy as a creative, uh, an act of creation, I guess you could say. Uh, so it's like, well, you have these big entities, these big churches, ministries putting out these albums and these songs that are well crafted and well produced, um, and give the people what they want, what they're listening to, or something like that. And I have other ideas about what it means to be creative in the church too. But there was a part of me that got lost,
Hmm.
by just being a cover band for all intents and purposes. And people would look at what I was doing, because I wasn't even trying to, like, well, let's make this song our own. I was like, no, let's do it, like, let's try to be like this, as let's try to emulate this as close as possible. And in that process, I just stopped seeing myself as a creative person. I thought I was kind of
Right.
innovative. I would use existing things to innovate in our context, but and I even kind of was critical of creativity, like people bringing ideas, because I was like, no, it's just not going to be as good. It can't be as good as these X, Y, and Z. And so getting into this process of okay, so yeah, there's podcasters all over the world doing stuff and blah, blah, blah. I'm not that's not a new thing, but I have tried to be more honest in the process of, like, I don't want to just follow the trends. I don't want to just do that. Now there was also this whole idea of best practice, which is not, I mean, how do you write an essay, and how does an editor work? Like, there are best practices and these things, but that's kind of the left brain right thing you were talking about earlier. And I felt like I was trapped in just the best practice versus uh being honest, putting something else out that is close as you can to being authentically yours. Um, and even though I had a band, it was, again, we were just like going out and doing cover songs all over the place. And so, um, we might have dressed creatively, or, but I don't know. That's just me kind of giving you the flavor of coming into trying to get reacquainted with, am I a creative person? I think I actually am, but I had forgotten it. So I don't know if that makes but my thread was broken when I was talking to you earlier about that thread.
Right. Well, and your thread is music.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
Well,
it
it's
was. It
like we,
was.
yeah, and it can change. I mean,
Yeah,
and what ignited you about that might have been something more primal than the music itself. It could have been just the idea of creation.
it's possible. It
Yeah.
was
Well,
it
it
was
sounds like you're
connected.
still
It was
trying to.
always connected to the sacred, though, because for
Mm,
all the beef that the modern rock stuff was, that was where I had my most sacred experiences as a teenager, and well, some of them, and it was connected to this modern rock worship music thing back in the late 90s. And so that's what
mhm.
really connected it. So it was also intrinsically tied to the religio of it as well. And that's also been kind of a challenge to tease that apart, if it even needs to be. Um, so I don't know.
Well, it sounds like you're in a much better place to be able to handle that now than you were then, because most people, when they get stuck in a rut like that, they blame the audience or they blame the bandmates or something like that, because The truth is that people in the short term definitely want what's familiar. But you have to ask yourself, are you willing to create what is unfamiliar and suffer not being understood for a decade maybe before you are the thing that's familiar?
Interesting.
And that's a decision that you have to make. you know and it's a decision. It's everybody has to make that decision for themselves, because nobody that's a, we watched the Arnold documentary, and Arnold, and he decided that he was going to do this thing, and he didn't care how long it took, and that was what he was going to do. And nobody wanted him. He was a great bodybuilder, and he had aptitude for that. But whenever he went to be an actor, everybody was like, "Dude, you're way too big. You have a crazy accent. You look like an ape, and you're not a good actor. So like, no." and and he just kept ringing that bell until he was recognized and loved for what made him a bad actor.
Yeah,
Um,
interesting.
and it's the same. I say ring the bell because that's like Conan O'Brien in trying to get into comedy. That's what he said on a podcast once was, you just keep ringing the bell, and you ring the bell long enough, and people finally go, "Who the hell is making that noise?" You just keep doing it consistently, and one day people are like, "What is that?" And they finally start to get to know it. But it is a tough decision, and it does require great sacrifice and great suffering. You know.
Yeah, I think I kind of asked that, like, um, even though we're on some second, third wave of this digital creation, uh, I don't know what you call it, uh, through in the last decade and a half or so, uh, and it's easy to think that you're late to the game and to get nihilistic about things. Um, at least it is for me. But I think one of the pieces that's helped me was like when I look at here, when you look at Joe Rogan, what the gold for Joe isn't just that he was early. It's also just that he kept doing it, and that he has the, like, there can be, okay, for instance, even so you have 1,500 subscribers on your Substack, and
Mm-hmm.
I don't know how many of them have had 3 hours of conversation with you. But I have, and that's gold. And I think that that's something that I'm in the process build a relationship, and like those are the things too, that it's not just the other parts of the craft. There's a relational aspect to it. There's and then I told myself, if you just do that, if you just don't stop, you win. If you just keep ringing the bell, kind of thing. And I don't know if "win's" the right word. You get the treasure. And I think this is part of the treasure.
Right.
So
Well, and I think it's something that Riley and I talk a lot about with being involved in the church and being Christian. It's like, because a lot of Christians, and I'm not really like this, a lot of Christians think that it's wrong categorically to have aspirations in the world.
yeah,
And
I grew up that way.
I right, and I mean, I think that that's uh, clearly not the case. What is wrong is to elevate those things above what is highest and truest and most real. And that's the only reason that is true, is because that's the only thing that works. If you and you can see it all the time, people who elevate these things, success or status, above what is most real, they die. It kills them. And it's practically universal that happens to them. But if you align yourself with what is if you align yourself as best you can with God, and God help us do that. It's very difficult for limited beings to keep that in mind all the time. But if you, to the extent that you do that, and then you get these instructions of like, well, God, this is what I want for my life. This is the way that I want to bring the kingdom. It's like, okay, well then you have to do this. You have to work this amount, and you have to do it. You have to do it authentically towards the gifts that you've been given, and you have to do it for 10 years with no recognition. And it's like, as soon as you realize that, it's like, great, because I'm happy just suffering for the kingdom in the meantime. It actually sets you right. You're you're able to make the proper sacrifices when you have that alignment. And I think it's no coincidence that, if you look back through the history of literature and music, it's like, what percentage of them are religious and what percentage of those people are Christian? It's like, it's quite a lot, and it's like, I think, it's like Christianity and religion and alignment to all of that. It has an aspect of like, you will be right with eternity. And that is better than uh, getting your pleasure now, or, even having a good life. But I think it's also the case that on a micro level, it is practically the best hope that you have to have your life go the way that you want it to go. Because it is true. And so that's what I find to be the case. And the number one predictor of success in the long term is the ability to delay gratification.
Yeah.
And what if you could delay gratification indefinitely and put it all in the hands of God? It's like, well, then you have the highest possible chance of finding success in a way that would light you up and be aligned with your gifts and your passions. So I really believe that to be the case.
A little bit of some Petersonian wisdom in there, and some
yeah.
And a real truth or aspect, you kind of were contrasting this to kind of certain Christian culture out there. And you talked a lot about alignment, and that to me is a better or more helpful in my case way of what is sin. Like it's an alignment issue of aim.
Mm-hmm.
I mean not, and there's so much there, about focus. There's so much there about true, like the arrow flew true to the target. Like, and that is truth more than certain kinds of epistemological versions. They're a different place on, like, facts are a different place on that table or on the stack of that. Maybe I'm a very, very amateur philosopher, so go easy on me, but like,
no, I think you're absolutely. I was thinking about it while I was sitting right here yesterday, and I was reading about how modern people think that a collection of more and more diverse sets of data will save them in the final analysis. That if they just collect enough truth about their observations of the world, then they will be they don't think of it in these terms, but they will be saved in some final sense. And for me, it's exactly the other way around. It's like, you forget all of that, you align yourself with the spirit of the creator, and then one step at a time figure out what you need to focus on, and let everything else that's irrelevant go. And I think there are just a lot of things that you don't need to know. And in fact, there are a lot of things that if you knew them, they would screw you up.
I said that almost exact thing when my conversation with Benjamin Boyce about truth, like, because a big part of my journey into this space had a little bit to do with or a lot to do with, is God real? Is evolution versus like a young earth theory of biblical literalism true, and I thought that if I could figure that out, that will save me. I thought that would save me from my struggle, because then I could know, then I would have a level of certainty that would prevent me from otherwise, struggling.
Right.
And that all fell flat on its face. It all exploded. So it's like, so I meet you there, man. And I think that, I mean, that's a deep part of this conversation, the one that I'm trying to have. That's the bell I think I'm trying to ring, honestly, is yours truly, related to that theme. It's not a postmodern one. I think it has something more to do with like ancient wisdom, and something like that about truth that we've hit on a couple of times. And yes. And that I don't have to know, did this happen exactly as it reads in a certain way for it to be true? And that the truth is something that it runs deeper. It runs deeper. And, but it takes a certain kind of faith to believe that, even. So,
right. Well, I struggle with this all the time because I have a certain temperament that is, and like very inquisitive and,
yes,
prone to kind of getting bogged down,
curious.
with curious. And I think the danger of that is you get bogged down with irrelevant details. And I think, what has been saving for me is like, when I'm anxious about whether or not something's true, whenever I'm sitting around, I'm going like, did Jesus really, like, what is it? Jesus is the Son of God. What does that mean? Like or like he's a guy and he lived at a time. I'm just like, what? Like, you kind of get bogged down with the detail. That's kind of where I get hung up. And it's like, what's much truer than that is like, I'll watch, Lion King, and funny enough, or like, we watched A Rebel Without a Cause, and you see a fragment of Christ in these stories, and it moves you, and you recognize the truth in a way that is like mind, body, and soul are aligned, and you cry because you see a fragment of Christ, you see a fragment of truth, you see that like James Dean's character has this like Christ-like desire to align himself with the truth. And that experience of that fragment of Christ is like, oh, when I feel that, I know that that's true. And in the ultimate sense, like, I believe that that Christ is the ultimate embodiment of that experiential truth. And so that's much more useful to me than getting bogged down with, nitpicking or like trying to legalize my faith structure and defend it. If somebody doesn't want to meet me there, that's their prerogative. That's fine.
It's really interesting. I'm so thankful to have had this conversation with you. What you were just hitting on there with these stories, and put into film. This is a big part of the conversation that I've had with Justin Wells, who I mentioned to you last time we talked. He's another LA guy that hangs around in these spaces on the internet, and he's doing this thing called Story Grid, and trying to expand upon the hero's journey a little bit in seeing if that can catch in Hollywood in a certain way to tell better stories. And of course, and we've had conversations. I had one with him and Nate Heil, who runs a channel called Grail Country. When we were kind of talking, have you encountered Martin Shaw?
No.
On the internet? I'll text you that to remind. He's I would be really interested to hear your thoughts on Martin Shaw. He's got a great Substack, but he's a storyteller. He's called a Sharnachy in Ireland, and that's like the old name for the village storyteller. And he still takes people on like retreats and you go fast for 3 days, and then you sit around a campfire, and he tells you the Iliad, like verbatim, like he tells you the story over like 2 days. And he recently became a Christian, and he was at the Symbolic World conference I went to with put on by Jonathan Peugeot back in February as one of the keynote guys. But they again, this conversation with Nate about Martin Shaw and with Justin about the veil of Christ in the story that you're talking about, and how there's like when it points to that yearning, that Nate calls it witness. Like that's what he believes is taking place there is a type of witness to the truth, or
Yes.
goodness and beauty, and so there's a lot. You had a conversation with Nate, actually. I
I
forgot.
did.
Yeah,
Yeah.
you and Nate. So that was a piece. So those are some deep roots within, I think, creativity that I mean, that's like a spiritual side of creativity that I'm just kind of learning in a certain way. When I say spiritual, and we're talking about Christ, so it's specifically Christian, but that I'm trying. I don't know if I've even been able to tap on that door very well. 'Cause that's a deep one, but it is. I mean, we are tapping on it right now, I guess.
Yeah. Well, we've all been there.
Yeah.
I feel sorry for people who are so captured by their midwit takes that they
Mm.
can't experience grandeur, and they can't um, they can't know something is true on a right-brained mystical level. Um, and I guess I was there, so I get it. Um, but that's what's most important to me now. And yeah, and I think on that, and in that realm, it's like I was led to Christ through that experience of truth. And I know many people who have also been led that way. And for people who are not being led that way or have a lot of questions, or that's not my business, and for me, it's just like talking in a loving way and trying to tell stories. And, um, it's not my business to try to convince everybody on the planet to think the way I think.
So it's just to tell your story. So where people can find your story at James Taylor Foreman Substack.com.
Hmm.
It's called The Metaphor. Your Substack is called The Metaphor.
Yes.
Uh,
And the metaphor, I have plans to make, I'm going to continue to grow the metaphor. I want it to be a place eventually where other great writers and storytellers can submit. I want it to become, I have this vision of it becoming like a post Enlightenment New York Times,
wow.
where it's not about objectivity or no spin. It's about the truth in the way that we're talking about the truth. And yeah, so that's what I see in the future. And I also see, participating in storytelling and getting to make, Riley is a great actor. And um, I I've written a book, and I do want to publish that, maybe even on the metaphor. And I do want to invite other people to share stories in the metaphor eventually. Um, but yeah, so that's what I'm looking forward to in the future.
So you have a book. Can you share anything about it? Do you want to, or is
I
that still behind the closed doors for right now?
I could share just kind of, it's called Arc of the Stars. I've been writing it since I was about 21. Um, and it has transformed through and with me, as I've gone on this journey. And I think the next iteration will be, it'll be out there and published. So I feel like I'm coming to an end of a great journey, and hopefully starting another one. So that's called Arc of the Stars. It's sort of like Dune, if Dune were less cynical about. It's like if Dune were Lord of the Rings. It's like science fiction if it had a Christian author who believed in the deepest truths like Tolkien did. Um, I would never claim to be as genius as either of those men, but I aspire to something like that.
Dude, that's exciting. Um, man, oh, well, I can't wait to experience that. And I have one more thing that is related to this, and I know we've been going for an hour and a half, so um, it are you good to answer one more question?
Sure. Let me get some shade.
Yeah, no,
The
that's what I
the
was thinking.
the sun keeps moving.
I know. I was like looking at you glowing, and I'm like, oh, I've got one. Because I think that this for me is one time I had a conversation with a guy, and he compared me to. I was getting some coaching. He compared me to Wendell Berry because do you know who Wendell Berry is?
I've heard his name. I do not. I'm not
He's
familiar.
he's an author.
Okay.
Instead of like, because I still live in my hometown. I never really left. I spent some summers in different places across the United States doing like camps and stuff, but I've never really left home.
Mm.
And how how much for you to, you know, you're out in LA, like how important is that? How important is that to go for you to be creative or I don't know, like what part of that do you think is necessary or is part of that process in that journey?
I think it was necessary, and it maybe still is, but it is becoming less so all the time. Um, I think uh, I went to LA because I wanted to stand up on stages and get over some fears and learn how to tell stories in public and meet other people who are doing that. But storytelling in LA is kind of anemic and falling apart because everybody is so trapped in their ideologies that they can't tell truth anymore. Um, and you see like glimmers of like even it's like Dune 2 was amazing, but it was also like not it, it was captured by some spirit that is not the truth. And I see that there are other, like the Daily Wire is like they're trying to make stuff, but and I know I tend to ramble around a question before I get to the question itself, but
I'm good.
um, there's some, I don't know how good conservatives aren't very creative. Um, and what the movie that Matt Walsh just made, the Am I Racist? It was very successful, and it wasn't part of Hollywood, but it also wasn't like a story. It was just very reactionary. It was very conservative, and I think people are hungry for that. They're hungry for some truth, or they're hungry for some comedy that is not telling them what to think or what to feel. And I think that's all good, but I don't know where it's going to go because, like, I think that there is I think I see myself as one of these people, and you as well. That's like, we're not like conservative people by temperament. We're open-minded, creative people, and like very open-minded, but I have a very conservative uh, perspective on things because I, I've discovered that makes sense for me, and I don't know. What I'm trying to say is that, like, I think there's maybe a new cohort of people coming along, of highly creative people that have something true to say, and it's this weird cohort of like um, Paju sort of related people, um, hopefully that will begin to write books and make movies and tell stories. And I don't know if that'll take place in Hollywood or not. Um, I haven't seen any of it yet. And maybe once the floodgates open and people start making stuff like this again, that all the people that agree with us in Hollywood will finally have their voices heard, and they'll start making stuff again all of a sudden. I could very well see that happening. I could see it not happening. The other sort of socio economic factor in this is that because we live in a very highly connected world, and more so all the time, people are moving out of these big cities and going back to towns that have churches and have communities and are beautiful and make a hell of a lot more sense than living in these like hellish doldrums like in LA where the homeless was the problem, and there's this it's not good in many ways. It's very expensive notwithstanding. And on top of that, with all of that going on, it's like Riley is a very great actor, but she is a agrees with us on this sort of thing, and she's a very Christian, a very spiritual person who will not sell herself to do stuff in Hollywood that typically you have to do to get ahead. And so she does her thing, but we talk about like, are we going to move to New England and like move to a little church town? Are we going to move to Texas? So like we talk about this sort of thing. We're not ready yet because we're it's just not time for whatever reason. We're trying to get more established, and or maybe we're seeing how it shakes out. We have good friends in LA and a good church community and stuff like that. So that's all to say that there's a bunch of moving pieces in the world right now. And it might be the case that Hollywood dissolves, and that if you want to be creative, you don't have to go to these big hubs. You can make your podcast and you can write your stuff and you can find your community that way. But there, at the same time, it has historically been the case that moving to a place like that allows you to be around more people who are creative and who are kind of pushing the boundaries. That is invaluable. So it's kind of a mixed bag, and it's changing, I think, in the favor of staying in where you come from. So that's a long answer to your question.
Well, I appreciate it, man. Well, dude, thank you so much. Is there anywhere else you want to point people to related to your work other than your Substack or anything like that? Or we've kind of covered that.
Substack is where it's at right now. Subscribe to the Metaphor. Let me know. Like, feel free to talk to me and email me and tell me what reflect what you like and what you want more of. And I want to start more conversations with people and bring some of that right brain truth into the world in a way that makes sense for people. So that's my goal.
Awesome, dude. Thank you for your time today and long suffering in the sun in this conversation. Another piece of the theme we had. So appreciate it so much.
Thanks, Christian.
All
Good
right.
talking to you.
Hi, this is Christian Baxter, and you're listening to Yours Truly, a place we go to think out loud.